This is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez. Senator Barack Obama is back in Chicago after his overseas trip. We turn now to the story of how the senator from Illinois and the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee was shaped by his years in Chicago and how he navigated the tough world of Chicago politics. Ryan Lizza is the Washington correspondent for the New Yorker magazine. His latest article traces Obama's political rise in Chicago. It's called Making It: How Chicago Shaped Obama. He joins me now from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Hey, thank you, Juan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Ryan, you had a fascinating article in the New Yorker magazine. It, to some degree, was overshadowed by the front page cartoon that got all the attention, but it really was one of the most in-depth looks I've seen at the rise of Barack Obama. And we'd like to spend some time going in detail into that article, and for you to tell us a little bit about how it was that when he gets there, I think it was 1985, he begins to initially as a community organizer. Could you tell us a little bit about his, because he often refers to that experience in his speeches, but it was really a pretty short experience of about 3 years. Could you talk about what he was doing as a community organizer in Chicago?
Yeah. So by 1985, he had graduated from Columbia University, and Obama had this sort of vague sense, as he writes about very eloquently in his book, Dreams from My Father, he had this vague sense that he wanted to go work in predominantly African-American communities and sort of, you know, give something back. He had gone through I mean, it's probably not much of an exaggeration to call it an identity crisis. Growing up in Hawaii, a very multicultural place, with a white mom and a Kenyan dad who had left him. And he was basically looking for a more authentic African-American experience. I think that's what drew him to Chicago. And now, why Chicago, of all places in America? Chicago, you know, is you know, some people describe it as the capital of Black America, and I think he was really drawn to that place. You know, it's where Jesse Jackson is based. It's where Farrakhan is based. It's the sort of capital of Black thought in America, and I think that's one reason he wanted to go there. The other reason is it's one of the few places where he was offered a job. And there were a few guys. One of them was named Jerry Kelman. They're white, Jewish, and they were working in the inner city in Chicago trying to organize the south side, the far south side of Chicago, predominantly Black, to basically for things like job centers, and they were basically dealing with some plant closings. There were some steel plants that had closed outside Chicago and in Indiana that had really devastated the area. And so these guys were looking, and they were having some trouble organizing in on the south side of Chicago, and they were specifically looking for an African-American organizer to help them. And Obama applies for this job, and he gets it, and he moves to Chicago in 1985. That's a long run-up to explain sort of where he was coming from and what brought him there. When he gets there, what he does for about 2.5, 3 years is work through the local churches on the south side, which in a sense are all sort of independent operators. They weren't working together, so one of the big challenges for Obama and the organizers he was working with was to get the Baptist minister on one street and maybe the Catholic priest on another street to start to get to know each other and work together to tackle some of these common problems. And so a lot of what he did was go around to the churches, talking to the church leadership, and finding out what these guys had in common and how they could come together under an umbrella organization to deal with some of the problems from these steel plants closing. At the same time, Juan, what's happening in Chicago is Chicago from 85 to 88, the period when Obama was there, when he was first there, is a really fascinating, tumultuous political world. Harold Washington is the mayor. He's the first African-American mayor in Chicago history, the first and the only one. And just when Harold Washington was getting his mayoral office organized, and in 1987 he was elected to his second term, he drops dead of a heart attack. And then there was a very tumultuous period after that to find a successor to Harold Washington. Anyway, the point being that Obama was sort of watching real gritty urban politics up close, and it was something that I think stuck with him later in life. So there are two experiences, I guess, in the 80s. The one is the on-the-ground organizing he's learning and the concepts he's learning as an organizer. And the second is he's watching the first African-American mayor of Chicago deal with trying to run that city. And he also sort of watched this grand white-black coalition that Mayor Washington put together then completely fragment and fall apart after his death. So I think those are the sort of two main things he's watching in the 80s.
Now, he apparently doesn't have a whole lot of success with the community organizing, and eventually decides to go to Harvard Law School and then returns to Chicago. But now, as your article lays out, he really has a bigger plan in mind when he returns to Chicago, and he deliberately goes not to the South Side, but to another neighborhood of Chicago to settle in and to build political allies. Could you talk about that period?
Yeah, no, by the time he finishes Harvard Law School in 1991, he's already telling friends that he wants to return to Chicago and get into politics. He had realized that community organizing was not an effective way to deal with the problems he saw. He wasn't all that successful at it. The problems were too entrenched to really make much of a difference, as he once told me in an interview. And so he settles in Hyde Park. Now, Hyde Park, let me just correct you, Hyde Park is on the south side of Chicago. It's sort of an island in Chicago. It's integrated, multicultural. The University of Chicago is the sort of anchor of Hyde Park, and then the surrounding area is filled with academics and students, and a very progressive, integrated environment, like a lot of college towns. You know, you might compare it to Berkeley, California, or Madison. And he starts doing a couple of things. One, he meets his wife and he gets married. Two, he joins a law firm. And the law firm that he decided to join was very much a political statement. He joined the firm that was in opposition to the longtime ruling family of Chicago, the Daleys. After Harold Washington died, by 1989, Richard Daley was elected mayor. His father had ruled the city for a few decades, let me just get this date right, from the 50s through the late 70s. In 1989, his father was gone. Excuse me. By the late 70s, his father was gone. But by 1989, Daley is back in power. Obama joins a law firm that is sort of defined by its opposition to the Daley political machine. So in other words, he was making a sort of a political statement. And it's about this time that he starts to sort of look around for an office to run for. And that happens in 1995. He gets his first chance to run for office. And Juwan, do we have enough time to sort of tell that story of his first run?
Well, I think it is critical in terms of being able to understand how he forms his political vision, yes.
Yeah, so what happens is very interesting. 1995, which, think about it, is really not all that long ago, there's a woman named Alice Palmer. And Alice Palmer is a longtime local community leader, an education expert, someone with a lot of ties to the African-American leadership of Chicago. Her husband, a guy named Buzz Palmer, he had actually started a reform group in the notoriously racist Chicago Police Department, a sort of group to sort of African-American police officers. So the Palmers were a family who had a lot of ties to the black establishment in Chicago. They were longtime activists, older than Obama. Alice Palmer decides to run for Congress, and she decides to leave she just decides to leave her state Senate seat. And Obama decides that he's going to make a run for that state Senate seat since Alice Palmer's leaving. he starts going around to all of the key Democratic political operators on the south side of Chicago and lining up support. And eventually he gets the blessing of Alice Palmer herself, and she endorses him as the replacement for her state Senate seat. And she goes off and runs for Congress. Now what happens is she loses her congressional race very badly. She loses the primary to Jesse Jackson Jr., who holds the seat to this day. She garners only about 10% of the vote, and she decides that she has second thoughts, and she decides that now that she's looking at being out of politics altogether, she decides she wants her state Senate seat back. And a group of her supporters tell Obama,